What is the best DSLR camera for you? Well, I've got you covered. In this video, we're going to look at both beginner, enthusiast, and pro level cameras. Different cameras for different budget levels and skill levels. By the way, if you're new around here, we talk about anything and everything to do with camera gear, helping you guys find the perfect camera. So if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, help me keep making more of this content for you guys. And we just hit 100,000 subscribers. Cue the silver plaque. So it is a very, very worthwhile subscription. So make sure to subscribe. And the most important thing is, I'm gonna leave links down below for all of the products that we talk about today. So make sure to check that out. Let's get into the video. And let's get right into the first camera. This first camera is for someone who is casually shooting their life or is really passionate about starting to learn photography, and you're on a budget. For you guys, I have the Canon T7. It's actually the world's most popular DSLR because it's also the world's most affordable DSLR. And the Canon T7 is actually one of the top 5 cameras that I recommend the most often. And there's 3 really good reasons for that. The first is the high quality sensor. The 24 megapixel sensor, along with Canon's amazing colors, is going to deliver very high quality. It's actually the same camera sensor that you normally find in a much more expensive camera like the Canon M50 or the T8i. And the photos from this camera are perfect for travel, adventure, party, precious memories, or if you just want to flex on the Instagram or social medias. And it's definitely going to deliver way better quality than your cell phone. And the second reason is the autofocus. Because believe it or not, autofocus is actually the thing most people struggle with. But the autofocus in the Canon T7 is very reliable and very fast, which is pretty surprising considering the price point of this camera. Most cameras at this price level have pretty terrible autofocus. However, the autofocus is only good in photo mode. In video mode, it's pretty terrible. Something that I should mention is that this camera only shoots at 3 frames per second in photo mode, which should be just fine for family photos, precious memories, travel, adventure, but if you're shooting something with fast moving objects or a lot of action, you might miss the shot. But don't worry, I have a faster camera for you later in this list. And as for video, the Canon T7 does have a video mode, but it's kind of just tacked on. It does full HD up to 30 frames per second, which is pretty nice. But there is no slow motion option in this camera, and also it doesn't have any kind of stabilization, and again, the autofocus in video mode is pretty bad. And the last reason that I love the Canon T7 is actually the design and build quality. This camera is not only easy to use, but it's also built like a tank, which means it's built to last and will survive anything you throw at it. Also, the menu system in this camera is great and it's super easy to navigate. Now, if you're gonna pick up the Canon T7, I really do recommend this camera mostly for photos. You can do a little bit of video, but if you do want a camera that shoots faster and does video really well, in that case, I recommend looking at the Nikon D3500. One thing that you guys should be aware of, the Nikon cameras tend to have much cooler colors and the blues tend to be a little bit more desaturated, where Canon colors tend to be really warm with heavy saturation on the blues and reds. So what camera you pick might also depend on what kind of colors you like. The Nikon D3500 is only about $100 more than the Canon T7, but it does 5 frames per second versus the 3 from the Canon T7, and it does full HD up to 60 frames per second. But best of all, the autofocus in video mode is actually quite good. So next up, let's look at 2 cameras that deliver a ton of horsepower and are made for enthusiast users. So first up on this list is the Nikon D5600. The D5600 is a great camera for someone who wants to not only shoot photos, but also wants high quality video. Now, this is actually a great camera for someone that's just starting out. Maybe you're a hobbyist, a casual shooter, but it's also a fantastic fit for someone that's a young professional if you're doing headshots, wedding videos and photos, or corporate work. It has a 24 megapixel sensor just like the Canons, but it shoots at 5 frames per second, which makes it a lot easier to capture moving action. And it also shoots full HD up to 60 frames per second for 2 times slow motion. Now, this camera doesn't have a cinema or log profile in video mode, but you do get a little bit of flexibility with your colors if you shoot this camera in flat profile. Sadly, there is no 4K, but most cameras at this price point usually don't have 4K. And just like the D3500, this camera also has great autofocus in both photo mode and video mode. And you might be wondering, so how is the D5600 different than the D3500? Well, my friend, let me tell you. And the first reason is the articulating screen. The D5600 has a side articulating screen, which makes it easier to frame low angle, high angle shots, and just overall, it's easier to use than a fixed screen on the back. And the side articulating screen also has touch functionality, which allows you to do touch autofocus. The internal audio in this camera is great. It actually has stereo internal audio, so whether you're shooting friends, vlogging, or just shooting whatever with your life, you're gonna get great internal audio. But this camera also has an input for external audio, which is going to give you crisp, clean, high quality audio. So if it fits your budget, I definitely recommend getting the D5600 over the D3500. And as for design, it's really well built, but it's not as well built as a Canon. And it's really user-friendly, but it's not as user-friendly as a Canon. Okay, so I get roasted by you guys for being a Canon fanboy. Here's the thing, I am a fanboy, but I'm a Red camera or ARRI camera fanboy. I'm not a Canon fanboy. So here's the thing, the D5600 is super well built, the ergonomics are great, but I really recommend this camera for someone that's willing to take their time to learn this camera and get used to it. It's not like a Canon camera where you can just pick it up and everything is super simple, super straightforward. If you want a Canon camera, I do recommend getting one, but just know that most Canon cameras are slightly underpowered, especially when you compare them to a Nikon camera. And speaking of Canon cameras, let's talk about my favorite Canon camera, and that is the Canon 90D. So the Canon 90D is an enthusiast camera, but it delivers pro-level quality. And in my opinion, it's absolutely the best DSLR for video. And this would work for almost anybody, travel photographers, wedding filmmakers, corporate filmmakers. It's honestly a great all-rounder. The Canon 90D actually has a 32 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is more megapixels than the 5D Mark IV. If you don't need full frame, this camera is going to give you plenty of resolution. Also, in photo mode, the Canon 90D actually shoots at 11 frames per second, which is not only faster than the 5D Mark IV, but it's also just as fast as most cameras out there. But video is where this camera really shines. It does full HD up to 120 frames per second, but it also does 4K with no crop. Most cameras, especially in this price range, when they go into 4K mode, they tend to crop into their sensor. Basically, you throw away half of your sensor, half of the money that you paid on this camera, but the Canon 90D actually shoots the full sensor. If you're a video shooter, you know what a big deal this is. But the real reason the 90D is actually my favorite DSLR are for these two reasons. Number one, the design. It's impeccable. It was made for video shooters in mind. There's an LCD screen on the top that lets you see all of your settings at a glance, so you're never worrying about like, did I get that shot right? Is that setting right? No, everything is right there. That is super key for video shooters. Everything from the way the camera's designed, the grip feels, it's really made towards video shooters and holding this camera for long periods of time. And one thing that I love about this camera is that the headphone jack is perfectly placed so that the side articulating screen never hits the headphone jack. This is a thing that you really don't see on most modern cameras. If you're a video shooter, a documentary shooter, or a wedding guy, this camera has the perfect design for long video days. But the second reason I love this camera is actually the autofocus. The autofocus is flawless in both photo and video mode. It actually has Canon's dual pixel autofocus, which not only has intelligent eye tracking, but also intelligent object tracking. You can literally just set it and forget it. Now, quick disclaimer, it's not quite as good as the Sony cameras, but with Canon's color science and pretty much like 9 out of 10 autofocus, I would probably use this camera over a Sony camera for long documentary days any day. And if you're a vlogger or someone that spends their time on YouTube talking to a camera like this camera will make your life 10 times easier with the autofocus. Also, side note, battery life impeccable, will easily last you 4 to 6 hours on a single charge. But this camera isn't perfect. There is one major flaw that might make it a deal breaker for some of you. This camera does not have a log profile. It does have a flat profile, but you really won't get the same cinematic color grading appeal, and it doesn't have a professional all-eye codec. It has an IPB codec, which is a lower bitrate. So I wouldn't really recommend this camera for high-end commercial projects or short films. But if you are someone that wants to create really amazing things with their camera, chances are you want to learn how to take better photos and videos, and you want to do it today. I put together a free training video with 7 simple secrets that will literally make your photos and videos go from this to this. Absolute game changer. These simple secrets include things like frame rates, lens choices, camera angles, and how to get the most out of your gear that you're currently using right now, even if that gear is a smartphone. I included a link down below in the description, so make sure to check that out. Okay, so finally, let's look at the professional big boy cameras on this list. So at this point, it kind of becomes a battle between the Canon 5D Mark IV or the Nikon D50, and here's the thing. You guys always roast me for taking Canon side, or it just becomes a whole thing in the comments about what brand is better. So for this section, we're actually going to compare the two cameras, and you guys let me know in the comments what camera you would get. First things first, let's compare the sensors. The Canon 5D Mark IV has a 30 megapixel full frame sensor, and the Nikon D850 also has a full frame but 45 megapixel sensor. That's an increase of 15 megapixels for the Nikon. So for that reason, point Nikon. And both cameras perform really well at high ISOs, but the Canon is slightly cleaner, not because it has less noise, because it has fewer megapixels and the grain isn't quite as prominent. This is one of those things where you might care or you might not care about the noise pattern. Personally, I think it's a tie. What I do care about is the color science. Canon has really warm, well-saturated colors, while the Nikon colors are more muted and cooler colors. It really depends on what you prefer, but I think most people prefer the look of the Canon cameras. And again, it's a tie, but the one place the Nikon cameras really shine is that the raw codec in the D850 can be pushed a lot further in post-work and editing than the Canon 5D Mark IV, so point Nikon. Now, I would really recommend both of these cameras primarily for photography, but both of these cameras do a really good job at video as well. For photos, both cameras shoot at 7 frames per second in photo mode. However, the Nikon can take 56 photos in a row, while the Canon only does 21 raw photos in a row. So point Nikon. And you might be thinking, so Nikon is clearly better. Not exactly, because when it comes to autofocus, when you're actually taking these photos, the Canon autofocus is far superior. Nikon actually has more focus points built into the camera, but because of Canon's dual pixel autofocus, it does a much better job at tracking and keeping the subject in focus, especially when it's moving really fast. So if you're someone that does a lot of action, you're gonna definitely wanna go with the Canon camera over the Nikon. So point Canon. And when it comes to video, you really see the biggest difference between these two cameras. The Nikon camera does 4K video with 0 crop, which is amazing at full frame. Plus, it does 120 frames per second in full HD. The D850 is quite a beast when it comes to shooting video, but the Canon 5D Mark IV isn't a slouch either. The Canon 5D Mark IV does 1080p up to 60 frames per second, and you might be thinking, well, it doesn't do as much as the Nikon, but here's the thing. That full HD is actually downsampled from 4K, so you're gonna get the sharpness and details of a 4K image in a 1080p file. But when the 5D Mark IV goes into 4K mode, it is hot garbage. It crops into the sensor and it's not that sharp. Don't use it. It breaks my heart. Point Nikon. But I'm still going to give Canon a point here as well, because in video mode, Canon actually has C-Log, which is a really robust cinema profile, while the Nikon only has a flat profile. And I'm not gonna talk about the build quality or design of these cameras, because come on, they're $3,000 professional cameras. They're well built and they're well designed. Of course they are. So what it really comes down to is, what camera would you get for yourself? For photos, I would definitely go with the Canon because I want those well saturated Canon colors and I want that fast autofocus. But for video, obviously I'm gonna go with the Nikon because I want the 120 frames per second at full HD and I want the uncropped 4K. Let me know in the comments down below what camera is right for you, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more, but most importantly, check out the live training in the link down below. It is an absolute game changer if you want to take your work to the next level. And with that being said, I'll either see you in the next video or in the live training. Peace.